Have you ever felt judged the second you walk into a room? For one young woman named Sarah, that judgment happened at 30,000 feet in the cramped confines of an airplane. She was just trying to start her dream vacation when the passenger next to her, a wealthy, entitled woman named Catherine, refused to even sit beside her. What followed was a flight from hell, filled with cruel words and public humiliation. But a sudden, terrifying mid-air emergency would change everything, leading to a stunning pilot's announcement that would expose a shocking secret and serve up a dose of karma so perfect you won't believe it's real. The fluorescent lights of JFK's Terminal 4 hummed a monotonous drone that did little to soothe Sarah's frayed nerves. She clutched her boarding pass for the overnight flight to London. Like a sacred text, the flimsy paper a testament to months of scrimping and saving. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It was an escape from a dead-end job, a shoebox apartment, and the gnawing loneliness that had become her constant companion. Her dark curls were pulled back into a messy bun, and her simple jeans and t-shirt were chosen for comfort, not style. She felt invisible, another face in the endless river of people flowing through the airport. Finding her gate, she sank into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, pulling out a well-worn paperback. She tried to lose herself in the story, but her gaze kept drifting to the other passengers. A family with 2 boisterous children, a group of businessmen in sharp suits, and a woman who looked like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. This woman, dripping in designer labels and radiating an air of untouchable privilege, was meticulously reapplying her lipstick. Her lips pursed in a permanent pout. Sarah watched her, a familiar pang of inadequacy tightening her chest. The boarding announcement crackled through the speakers, and Sarah joined the queue for economy class. As the line shuffled forward, she found herself directly behind the designer-clad woman. The woman's perfume, a cloying floral scent, was overwhelming. She kept glancing back at Sarah, her nose wrinkled in a subtle expression of distaste that made Sarah's skin prickle. "Boarding pass, please," the gate agent said with a practiced, weary smile. Sarah handed it over. "Window seat, please, if possible." The agent tapped at her keyboard. "Looks like you're in 24A. It's a window seat. Enjoy your flight." Sarah smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. A window seat felt like a small victory. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt a flicker of excitement finally cut through her anxiety. London. A new beginning, even if just for a week. She found her row and squeezed past the man in the aisle seat, a friendly-looking guy in his late 20s who was already engrossed in a movie on his laptop. She settled into 24A, pressing her face against the cool plexiglass, watching the ground crew scurry around the massive aircraft. The middle seat, 24B, was still empty. Sarah hoped it would stay that way, a silent prayer for a little extra space on the long flight. Just as the final boarding call was announced, the designer-clad woman from the gate appeared at the end of the row. Her eyes, the color of icy blue, scanned the seat numbers before landing on 24B. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. She looked at Sarah, then at the empty seat, and then back at Sarah, her expression hardening. "Is this 24B?" she asked, her voice sharp and dripping with condescension. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied, offering a small, polite smile. The woman who Sarah would later learn was named Catherine Miller didn't return the smile. She heaved her oversized monogrammed carry-on into the overhead bin with a grunt, nearly hitting the man on the aisle in the head. He flinched but said nothing. Catherine then stood there, arms crossed, staring at Sarah. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, confused. "Is there a problem?" Catherine let out an exaggerated sigh. "I'm not sitting here." The man on the aisle, whose name was Ben, finally looked up from his laptop. "Is something wrong with the seat, ma'am?" "Something is wrong with the seating arrangement." Catherine snapped, her gaze fixed on Sarah. "I paid for a comfortable flight. This is unacceptable." Sarah's heart sank. She knew exactly what Catherine meant. The color of her skin. It was a familiar, painful sting she had felt countless times before, but it never got any easier. Her face grew hot, and she shrank back into her seat, wishing the window would swallow her whole. I don't understand," Sarah mumbled, even though she understood perfectly. "Oh, I think you do," Catherine said, her voice low and venomous. "I will not be sitting next to her for 10 hours, flight attendant." Her voice cut through the cabin's low hum, turning heads. A flight attendant, a young woman with a patient but tired expression, hurried over. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" "Yes, there's a problem," Catherine declared, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Sarah. "I demand a new seat. I refuse to sit next to this person." The flight attendant, whose name tag read Maria, looked from Catherine's furious face to Sarah's mortified one. Sarah could see the flicker of understanding and sympathy in Maria's eyes. "Ma'am, the flight is completely full," Maria said calmly. "There are no other seats available in any class." "That's not my problem." Catherine's voice rose, attracting more attention. "I am a Platinum Medallion member. I pay a premium for a certain level of service. This is not it. Find me another seat, or I'll have your job." Sarah felt a tear of humiliation slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, determined not to give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Ben, the man in the aisle seat, had taken off his headphones and was now watching the scene with a look of disbelief. "Ma'am," he said, speaking up for the first time, "what exactly is the issue?" "The young lady hasn't done anything." Catherine whirled on him. "This doesn't concern you. Mind your own business." "It does concern me when you're publicly harassing my seatmate," Ben retorted, his voice firm. The confrontation escalated as more passengers turned to stare. Maria, the flight attendant, held up a placating hand. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. Let me see if there's anything I can do. But I must ask you to take your seat. For now, we need to prepare for takeoff." Catherine scoffed, but finally squeezed into the middle seat, pointedly angling her body away from Sarah and pulling her expensive pashmina tightly around herself as if to avoid contamination. She muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Sarah to hear, "Unbelievable. The standards have dropped so low." Sarah stared out the window, her vision blurring. The flickering lights of the runway seemed to mock her. Her dream trip, her great escape, was already tainted, ruined before the plane had even left the ground. She felt small, exposed, and utterly alone. The deep rumble of the engines starting up felt like a roar of laughter at her expense. As the plane taxied onto the runway, Catherine pulled out a bottle of hand sanitizer and scrubbed her hands raw, making a great show of it. The message was clear, and it landed like a physical blow. Sarah closed her eyes, praying for the flight to be over before it had even truly begun. The initial ascent was tense and silent. Sarah kept her body pressed against the fuselage, trying to make herself as small as possible. Catherine, in the middle seat, had created a fortress of her belongings on her lap. Her purse, a magazine, a travel pillow, a clear demarcation line that Sarah was not to cross. Ben in the aisle seat occasionally shot Sarah a look of solidarity, a small, silent acknowledgement that what was happening was wrong. About an hour into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed and the meal service began. When the cart reached their row, Maria, the flight attendant from the earlier confrontation, offered them their choices. "Chicken or pasta, ma'am?" she asked Catherine. "I'll have the chicken," Catherine said, without looking up from her magazine. "And a glass of Chardonnay, a real glass, not one of those plastic cups." "Of course," Maria replied, her professionalism unwavering. She turned to Sarah. "And for you?" "Just water, please," Sarah said quietly, her appetite gone. Catherine let out a derisive snort. "Probably for the best." Sarah bit her lip, refusing to react. She accepted the water and stared out at the endless darkness, speckled with the faint lights of some sleeping city below. The loneliness she'd been running from felt heavier than ever at 30,000 feet. As the flight wore on, Catherine's behavior grew more obnoxious. She spoke loudly on her phone until a flight attendant explicitly told her to turn it off. She complained about the temperature, the quality of the wine, and the recline of the seat in front of her. With each complaint, she would shoot a sideways glance at Sarah, as if she were the source of all her airborne misery. Ben, trying to diffuse the tension, attempted to make conversation. "So headed to London for business or pleasure?" he asked, directing the question to both of them. "Business," Catherine clipped, shutting down any further inquiry. "Pleasure," Sarah answered softly. "It's my first time." "Oh, you'll love it," Ben said warmly. "There's so much to see. If you get a chance, the British Museum is incredible, and the street food at Camden Market is a must." "Thank you, I'll keep that in mind," Sarah said, grateful for the small kindness. Catherine rolled her eyes dramatically. "I'm trying to rest," she announced to no one in particular, pulling an eye mask over her face and jamming noise-cancelling headphones over her ears. A few hours passed. Most of the cabin was asleep. Sarah, however, couldn't relax. Every time she started to drift off, she would be jolted awake by the memory of Catherine's hateful words. She felt a deep, simmering anger mixing with the humiliation. Why did she always just take it? Why couldn't she find the words to defend herself? Suddenly, the plane lurched violently, and a loud bang echoed through the cabin. The seatbelt sign flashed on with a sharp ping, and the captain's voice, calm but firm, came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We seem to have experienced some engine trouble. We are currently assessing the situation. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts securely fastened. The flight crew will be coming through the cabin to prepare for a possible emergency landing." A wave of panic rippled through the passengers. People gasped, and a baby started to cry. Catherine ripped off her eye mask, her face pale with fear. "What was that? What's happening?" she demanded, grabbing Ben's arm. "I don't know," he said, his own voice tight with worry. "Just try to stay calm." The flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, their faces grim but composed. Maria paused at their row. "Please review the safety card in the seat pocket in front of you. We'll be making a precautionary landing. We need everyone to remain calm and follow our instructions." Catherine's composure completely shattered. "Precautionary landing. We're in the middle of the ocean." Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch. "We're all going to die. Ma'am, please," Maria said firmly. "Panicking won't help anyone." But Catherine was beyond reason. She began to hyperventilate, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "I can't breathe," she wheezed, clawing at her throat. "I need a doctor." "Is there a doctor on board?" Maria called out, her voice rising above the nervous murmurs of the passengers. No one responded. Catherine's gasps grew more frantic. Her face was turning a blotchy red, and her eyes were wide with terror. Ben tried to calm her down, but she shoved him away. Sarah, who had been frozen in her seat, suddenly felt a surge of adrenaline. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but something else took over. She had spent the first half of the flight feeling powerless. Not anymore. She unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned across Catherine. "Look at me," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through Catherine's panic. "My name is Sarah. I need you to look at me and breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that?" Catherine stared at her, her eyes wild. I can't." "Yes, you can." Sarah insisted, her gaze unwavering. "Breathe with me. Now. In and out. In and out." She exaggerated her own breathing, making it slow and deep. Reluctantly, shakily, Catherine began to mimic her. Her panicked gasps slowly subsided into shuddering breaths. "That's it," Sarah said softly. "You're okay. We're going to be okay." Maria and Ben watched, stunned into silence. Sarah continued to talk to Catherine in a low, soothing voice, keeping her focused on her breathing, blocking out the chaos and fear that filled the cabin. She held Catherine's gaze, creating a small, calm bubble in the midst of a potential disaster. She wasn't just the girl in 24A anymore. She was the only thing standing between the woman who despised her and a full-blown panic attack. The captain's voice returned, announcing they would be diverting to Shannon Airport in Ireland. The relief in the cabin was palpable. As the plane began its descent, Catherine, now surprisingly calm, turned to Sarah. Her face was tear-streaked and stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah simply nodded, her anger replaced by a strange, weary empathy. The emergency had stripped them both down to their most basic human selves, terrified and vulnerable. As the lights of the Irish coast appeared through the clouds, a beacon in the dark, Sarah wondered if this shared trauma could possibly change anything, or if once they were safely on the ground, the walls Catherine had built would go right back up. The landing at Shannon was bumpy, but safe. A collective sigh of relief, followed by a burst of applause, filled the cabin as the wheels touched down. The immediate danger had passed, but now a new kind of uncertainty began. The passengers were herded off the plane and into a cordoned-off section of the small, quiet airport. It was the middle of the night, and the terminal was nearly deserted. Airline representatives promised hotel accommodations and a replacement flight to London in the morning, but the logistics were chaotic. People were tired, stressed, and irritable. Sarah found a spot on the floor against a wall, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her exhausted and emotionally raw. She watched as Catherine, having regained some of her composure, was now arguing with an airline employee, demanding a suite at the finest hotel in the area. Her voice was still laced with entitlement, but the shrill panic was gone. It seemed that as soon as her feet were on solid ground, her old self began to re-emerge. Ben found Sarah and sat down beside her. "You were amazing back there," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "You handled that better than anyone. Are you okay?" "I'm just tired," Sarah admitted, leaning her head back against the wall. "I think it's all just hitting me." "I can't believe that woman," Ben muttered, glancing over at Catherine. "After you literally saved her from a complete meltdown, you'd think she'd show a little gratitude, or at least basic human decency." "Some people don't change," Sarah said with a shrug, though a part of her had hoped foolishly that the shared fear might have cracked Catherine's prejudiced exterior. An announcement finally came that buses were arriving to take them to a nearby hotel. As everyone gathered their carry-on luggage, Sarah noticed something on the floor near where Catherine had been sitting. It was a wallet, a sleek, expensive-looking leather wallet. She picked it up and opened it. The driver's license inside showed a picture of Catherine Miller. For a moment, Sarah was tempted to just leave it. Let Catherine deal with the hassle of losing her ID and credit cards in a foreign country. It would be a small, deserved piece of karma. But her conscience wouldn't let her. With a sigh, she pushed her way through the crowd towards the airline desk, where Catherine was still making demands. "Excuse me," Sarah said, holding out the wallet. "I think you dropped this." Catherine turned her eyes, widening slightly, when she saw the wallet in Sarah's hand. She snatched it without a word of thanks and quickly checked its contents. Satisfied that nothing was missing, she shot Sarah a suspicious look. "You should be more careful," Sarah said, unable to resist the small jab. Catherine's lips tightened into a thin line. "I don't need your advice." She turned her back on Sarah and resumed her conversation with the beleaguered airline agent. Sarah just shook her head and walked away. She had done the right thing, and that had to be enough. On the bus to the hotel, Sarah ended up in a seat across the aisle from Catherine. Catherine pointedly ignored her, creating an invisible wall between them once again. The flicker of connection of shared humanity during the emergency was gone, extinguished, as if it had never happened. The hotel was a modest, clean establishment near the airport. The check-in process was slow, and the exhausted passengers formed a long, snaking line in the lobby. When it was finally Catherine's turn, she learned that the only rooms left were standard rooms with 2 double beds. They were being asked to share rooms to accommodate everyone. "Absolutely not," Catherine's voice echoed in the quiet lobby. "I am not sharing a room. It's unsanitary and a violation of my privacy. I am a Platinum Medallion member. Get me your manager." The night manager, a weary-looking man named Mr. O'Connell, was summoned. He listened patiently to Catherine's tirade before explaining in a calm Irish brogue that there were simply no other options. "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience, madame, but it's this or the airport floor. Every hotel for miles is booked solid due to a conference." Catherine looked around the lobby, her eyes flashing with fury. Her gaze landed on Sarah, who was next in line. A cruel, calculating look entered her eyes. "Fine," she said to the manager, her voice dripping with malice. "I'll share a room. With her." She pointed directly at Sarah. A hush fell over the lobby. Everyone who had been on the plane knew what had transpired between the two women. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a power play, a deliberate act of humiliation. Sarah was stunned. "What? No. I'm not. It's either that." "Miss," the manager said to Sarah, looking apologetic, "or you can wait to see if a single room opens up. But I can't promise anything." Trapped. Sarah felt a wave of despair. The thought of spending the rest of the night in a confined space with this woman was a nightmare. But the alternative, sleeping in the lobby, was even worse. She looked at Catherine's triumphant smirk and felt a familiar burn of anger and helplessness. "Fine." Sarah choked out the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. She took the keycard from the manager, her hand trembling slightly. As she and Catherine rode the elevator up to the 3rd floor, in suffocating silence, Sarah knew this long, terrible night was far from over. Catherine was going to make her pay for every perceived slight, starting with the crime of simply existing in her presence. The hotel room was small and stuffy. 2 double beds, a small desk, and a window overlooking the parking lot. The air was thick with unspoken hostility. Catherine immediately claimed the bed farthest from the door, tossing her designer handbag onto it, as if marking her territory. "I'll be taking the first shower," she announced, not asked. She disappeared into the bathroom, and the sound of the lock clicking shut felt like a final definitive statement. Sarah sank onto the edge of her own bed, her body aching with exhaustion. She felt like a prisoner. She could hear Catherine muttering to someone on her phone through the bathroom door, her voice a low, angry buzz. "You won't believe the day I've had. Some affirmative action hire. The absolute nerve." The words, though muffled, were like tiny daggers. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back tears of frustration. Why was this happening to her? Her trip of a lifetime had turned into a relentless series of humiliations. When Catherine finally emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a fluffy white towel, her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. Without it, she looked older, more tired and surprisingly vulnerable. But the hardness in her eyes remained. She ignored Sarah completely, rummaging through her suitcase for a silk pajama set. Sarah took her turn in the shower, letting the hot water wash over her, hoping it could somehow wash away the grime of the day. When she came out, Catherine was sitting on her bed, scrolling through her phone, a glass of water from the minibar in her hand. The silence stretched on, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Sarah knew she couldn't sleep. The tension in the room was a living thing coiling in the space between them. She had to say something. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet but steady. Catherine looked up from her phone, her expression one of mild surprise, as if she'd forgotten Sarah was even there. "Doing what?" "This," Sarah said, gesturing around the room. "Insisting we share a room. All of it. From the moment you saw me at the gate. What have I ever done to you?" Catherine let out a short, bitter laugh. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." Sarah challenged, her anger finally overriding her fear. "I've spent the entire day being treated like I'm less than human by a complete stranger. I think I deserve an explanation." For a long moment, Catherine just stared at her. The arrogant mask seemed to crack just for a second, revealing something raw and painful underneath. She looked away towards the dark window. "My husband. My ex-husband," she began, her voice suddenly brittle, "left me 6 months ago." Sarah was taken aback. This was not the direction she had expected the conversation to go. "He left me for his new assistant," Catherine continued, her voice gaining a venomous edge. "A girl just like you, young, black, ambitious. He told me she was vibrant and full of life, and that I had become stale, boring, predictable." She spat the words out like poison. Sarah listened, speechless. "His name was Robert Miller," Catherine said, a tremor in her voice. "We built a company together from the ground up, Miller Avionics. We design guidance systems for commercial aircraft. I poured 20 years of my life into that man, into that company." She took a shaky breath. "And he threw it all away for someone who looked just like you?" The pieces clicked into place. The entitlement, the platinum airline status, the business trip to London, and the irrational, targeted hatred. It wasn't just about race, not entirely. It was a twisted, painful transference. In Catherine's eyes, Sarah was the ghost of her own personal tragedy, the embodiment of the woman who had destroyed her life. "Every time I look at you," Catherine whispered, her voice thick with a mixture of grief and rage, "I see her face, see her. I see everything I lost, the life I was supposed to have." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. It didn't excuse her behavior. Nothing could. but it painted it in a different, more pathetic light. This wasn't a powerful woman exerting her privilege. It was a broken woman, lashing out at a world she felt had wronged her. "I'm sorry about your husband," Sarah said. And she meant it. The anger she had felt moments before was replaced by a profound, aching pity. "But I am not her. My name is Sarah Jones. I'm a graphic designer from Queens. I saved up for 2 years for this trip. I'm not trying to take anything from you." Catherine didn't respond. She just sat on her bed, staring at nothing, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. In that moment, stripped bare of her armor of wealth and prejudice, she just looked like a profoundly lonely woman. The animosity in the room hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer a one-sided assault. It was a shared space of pain, albeit from vastly different sources. They were two strangers, stranded in a foreign country haunted by their own private ghosts. Sarah turned off the light and lay down in her own bed, the darkness offering a fragile truce. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with the turbulent dreams of a flight that had gone terribly, terribly wrong. The next morning, the mood was subdued. Catherine was quiet, withdrawn. The raw vulnerability of the previous night was gone, replaced by a cool, distant politeness. They rode the shuttle back to the airport in silence. Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She hadn't expected a miraculous transformation, but the return to icy indifference was jarring after the emotional breakthrough. The airline had chartered a new plane to take them to London. As they waited at the gate, Sarah saw Ben again. He gave her a concerned look. "Everything okay? I saw they made you room with her." "It was interesting," Sarah said, offering a weak smile. "That's one word for it," he said, shaking his head. "Well, hopefully the rest of the trip is smoother." They boarded the new aircraft. By a strange twist of fate, or a deliberate choice by the gate agent who had witnessed the previous day's drama, they were assigned the exact same row, 24. Sarah in A, Catherine in B, Ben in C. Catherine settled into her seat without a word, pulling out a financial newspaper and hiding behind it. The flight was uneventful. The skies were clear, and the new plane hummed along smoothly. Sarah tried to read her book, but her mind kept replaying the events of the last 24 hours. The hatred, the fear, the confession. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. About an hour before they were scheduled to land at Heathrow, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was the same captain from the flight before. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Armstrong. Firstly, I want to again apologize for the diversion and the delay in your travel plans. I also want to thank you all for your calm and cooperation during a very stressful situation." He paused, and the cabin was quiet, everyone listening intently. "We are often trained for technical emergencies," he continued, "but we are not always prepared for the human element. Last night we had a passenger, Ms. Catherine Miller, in seat 24B, who experienced a severe panic attack during the emergency. It was a frightening moment for everyone." At the mention of her name, Catherine stiffened her face, flushing a deep red. She slowly lowered her newspaper, looking horrified at being singled out. The captain's voice continued warm and full of respect. In that moment of chaos, another passenger stepped up. Without hesitation, she calmed Ms. Miller down, using breathing techniques to de-escalate a potentially dangerous panic situation. Her quick thinking and compassion were truly remarkable. She showed a level of grace under pressure that I have rarely seen. Sarah's heart began to pound. She had no idea where this was going. "I learned this morning," the captain said, a note of pride in his voice, that this young woman is named Sarah Jones, seated in 24A. I also learned something else. Ms. Jones is the daughter of the lead aeronautical engineer who designed the very engine cowling that failed on our last flight. A collective gasp went through the cabin. Heads turned. Everyone stared at Sarah, their expressions a mixture of shock and awe. Ben's jaw was literally hanging open. Catherine looked at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. Her face was a mask of disbelief, her icy blue eyes wide with shock. The part that failed it, the captain explained, was from an older series, set to be decommissioned. The new design, the one her father, Dr. David Jones, perfected, is what is now the industry standard, and it is the engine model on this very plane we are flying on now. It's considered the safest in the world. The captain's voice filled the cabin, each word landing with more weight than the last. Dr. Jones is a legend in our industry, a man whose work has saved countless lives, and it seems that courage and grace run in the family. We on the flight deck, and I'm sure I speak for everyone at this airline, owe Ms. Sarah Jones a profound debt of gratitude, not just for her actions last night, but for her family's contribution to aviation safety. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you, Sarah. The cabin erupted in spontaneous, thunderous applause. Passengers leaned over seats to pat her shoulder, to thank her, to look at the unassuming young woman who was suddenly a hero. Sarah, her face burning, was completely overwhelmed. She felt tears welling in her eyes, not of humiliation this time, but of shock, pride, and a dizzying sense of vindication. But she didn't look at the other passengers. She looked at Catherine. Catherine Miller. The woman who had judged her, despised her, and humiliated her, was staring at her with an expression Sarah couldn't quite decipher. It was a chaotic storm of shock, shame, and utter bewilderment. The woman who built her fortune on avionics, whose ex-husband ran a company in the same industry, had just been told that the person she deemed inferior was the daughter of an industry giant, a black man whose genius she likely relied on every day without a second thought. The carefully constructed world of Catherine's prejudice, built on a foundation of perceived superiority, had just been obliterated at 30,000 feet. The karma was not just hitting back. It was a sonic boom shattering everything she thought she knew. The applause for Sarah was the soundtrack to her humiliation, a public testament to how terribly devastatingly wrong she had been. For the remainder of the flight, Catherine Miller was silent. She didn't hide behind her newspaper anymore. She simply stared straight ahead, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The fortress of her arrogance had crumbled, leaving behind a woman exposed and ashamed. Every so often she would dart a quick, unreadable glance at Sarah, but she couldn't seem to hold her gaze for more than a second. The applause had eventually died down, but the atmosphere in the cabin had fundamentally shifted. Sarah was no longer an anonymous passenger. She was a focal point of admiration and curiosity. A flight attendant came by and offered her a glass of champagne, courtesy of the captain. Another passenger passed her a note that simply said, "Thank you for what your father does and for what you did." Sarah accepted the thanks with quiet grace, though her mind was still reeling. She hadn't known the captain would do that. Her father, Dr. David Jones, was a humble man who rarely spoke about the importance of his work. To him, it was just his job. Hearing him lauded like that, and by extension herself, was a surreal experience. As the plane began its final descent into London, the familiar sights of the city coming into view, Sarah felt a sense of calm settle over her. The trip had started as an escape from feeling small and invisible. Now she felt seen in a way she never could have imagined. The plane taxied to the gate at Heathrow, As the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers began to stand and retrieve their luggage. Ben turned to Sarah. "I'm speechless," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "Your father is David Jones. I've read articles about his work. He's a genius. And you? Well, like father, like daughter, I guess." He smiled warmly. "If you need a friendly face in London, or someone to show you that food market, let me know." He scribbled his number on a piece of paper and handed it to her. "Thank you, Ben, for everything," Sarah said, meaning it. His simple kindness before he knew anything about her had been a lifeline. As she stepped into the aisle to get her bag from the overhead compartment, she came face to face with Catherine. The other passengers were moving past them, but for a moment the two women were isolated in their row. Catherine's face was a wreck of conflicting emotions. The shame was palpable. She started, her voice raspy. She stopped, swallowed hard, and tried again. "I had no idea." "I know," Sarah said simply. "What I said. What I did." Catherine's eyes were glassy with unshed tears. "It was inexcusable. It was monstrous." "Yes," Sarah agreed. She wasn't going to offer easy absolution. "It was. My ex-husband, Robert." Catherine continued the words, tumbling out as if she couldn't hold them in any longer. "His company, Miller Avionics, they use your father's components. They bid on contracts against his firm all the time. Robert used to complain about him. He called him the competition. He knew how brilliant he was. We both did." The irony was staggering. The very man whose family she had scorned was a figure of professional respect and envy in her own world. The prejudice she had wielded was not just morally bankrupt, it was factually absurd. "I am so sorry," Catherine whispered the words, finally coming out. It wasn't a grudging apology, it was the sound of a woman utterly broken by the weight of her own actions. For everything. Sarah looked at her, at this woman who had caused her so much pain. She saw the pathetic story of a bitter divorce, the ugly racism, the crushing public humiliation. And she felt nothing. The anger was gone. The pity had faded. There was just an empty space where the hurt had been. "I hope you find a way to be a better person, Catherine," Sarah said, her voice even. "For your own sake." She turned, pulled her bag down from the bin, and walked away without looking back. She left Catherine standing alone in the aisle, a solitary figure amidst the departing crowd. Sarah walked down the jet bridge and into the bright, bustling terminal of Heathrow Airport. She took a deep breath of the new air. London was waiting. Her escape had failed, but in its place she had found something far more valuable, her own strength. The trip was no longer about running away from who she was, but about stepping into the person she was meant to be. The moment Sarah's feet touched the polished floor of the Heathrow terminal, a palpable sense of release washed over her. It was more than just the end of a terrifying journey. It was an exorcism. The suffocating weight of Catherine Miller's disdain, an invisible poison that had seeped into her pores, began to evaporate in the vast, impersonal hum of the airport. She walked through the crowd not with the hurried head-down posture of someone trying to avoid notice, but with a measured, deliberate gait. She was no longer hiding. She had been seen, judged, and ultimately vindicated in the most public way imaginable. The experience had been excruciating, but the shame was not hers to carry. She left it behind a piece of discarded luggage in row 24 of the abandoned aircraft. Her first few days in London were a conscious exercise in reclaiming her joy. This trip, the one she had meticulously planned and saved for, would not be defined by another person's hatred. She plunged into the city's embrace. At the Tate Modern, she stood for an hour before a Rothko, letting the vast vibrating fields of color absorb her turmoil and replace it with a quiet awe. She spent an entire afternoon in a cool Notting Hill bookshop, the scent of old paper and brewing tea a comforting balm. She sketched in her notebook not just the architecture, but the faces of strangers, finding a unique story in every line and shadow. The city was healing her its sheer scale and endless motion, putting her own experience into a manageable perspective. On the third day, she met Ben for coffee near Borough Market. The easy warmth of his smile was a welcome anchor to normalcy. "I have to admit," he said, stirring his cappuccino, "I've replayed that pilot's announcement in my head about a dozen times. It was the most satisfying, movie-perfect moment of karmic justice I have ever witnessed." Sarah laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. It felt surreal. "I think I was in shock for the rest of the flight. My father is a very humble man. He'd be mortified to hear himself described as a legend." "A legend who saves lives," Ben corrected gently. "He deserves the praise. And so do you. I've been thinking about it a lot, how you just stepped in when she was panicking. You didn't hesitate even after how she'd treated you. I don't think many people would have done that." "I'm not sure why I did," Sarah admitted honestly, tracing a pattern on her mug. "Maybe I was just tired of feeling powerless. Calming her down was an action. It was something I could do instead of just sitting there and taking it." Their conversation flowed easily from there, weaving through their lives, their dreams, his work in software development, her passion for creating visual identities for brands with a purpose. It was a conversation between equals, filled with mutual respect and a burgeoning curiosity. As they parted ways with a promise to visit the V&A Museum later in the week, Sarah felt a lightness that had nothing to do with the city and everything to do with connection. It was a potent antidote to the isolation she had felt on the plane. While Sarah was finding her footing, Catherine Miller was losing hers. Her suite at the Savoy, a space designed for power meetings and opulent relaxation, had become a gilded cage. The panoramic view of the Thames felt like a mockery, a vibrant, moving world she was no longer a part of. She had cancelled her meetings, citing travel fatigue, but the truth was, she couldn't bear to face her colleagues. She couldn't bear to see the judgment in their eyes, the same judgment she had so freely dispensed. She spent hours replaying the flight. She saw the flash of fear in Sarah's eyes, the pity in the flight attendant's gaze, the wave of applause that felt like a physical blow. The pilot's words haunted her waking moments, courage and grace. Two qualities she had prided herself on possessing, now stripped from her and handed to the very person she had tried to debase. Her prejudice, she was forced to admit in the crushing silence, wasn't just a moral failing. It was a profound intellectual one. She, a supposed titan of industry, had been so blinded by a young woman's skin color that she had failed to see anything else. On the third night, driven by a desperate need to lash out at the source of her misery, she called Robert. His voice, when he answered, was as smooth and empty as she remembered. "Catherine, what a surprise. Everything all right?" "I was on a flight from New York," she began, her voice tight. "There was an emergency. An engine cowling failed. Good God, are you okay? You should have called sooner." The concern was programmatic, a line from a script. She ignored it. The captain made an announcement after. He praised the engineer whose designs are replacing the faulty model, a man named David Jones. She let the name hang in the air. Jones. Robert mused, a new sharpness in his tone. Yes, the ghost of Jones Aeronautical. Can't get a damn thing past him. Brilliant, but a thorn in my side for a decade. What about him? His daughter, a young black woman, was sitting next to me. Catherine said the words, tasting like acid. I made a scene, Robert. A colossal, humiliating scene. I refused to sit next to her. And then the captain gets on the intercom and essentially crowns her royalty in front of 200 people. They all applauded her for her grace, and they stared at me like I was a piece of trash. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. Catherine waited some small, pathetic part of her, still hoping for a sliver of comfort. What she got was a cold, brutal laugh. Jesus, Catherine, you really are your own worst enemy, aren't you? He said, the amusement in his voice twisting the knife. Did you tell anyone you were Mrs. Miller of Miller Avionics? Christ, I hope not. The last thing I need is you dragging the company name through the mud with your petty public tantrums. And just like that, the final thread of her old life snapped. It wasn't just that he didn't love her. It was that he held her in utter contempt. The bitterness she had nursed for months, the bitterness she had vomited all over Sarah, was a pointless shield. The enemy wasn't some young woman who had replaced her. It was the man she had given 20 years of her life to, a man whose soul was a black hole of narcissism. "You're right, Robert," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "Embarrassing the company name is a terrible thing. I'll have to find a way to rectify that." She ended the call. A chilling clarity descended upon her. She walked to the ornate desk, sat down, and opened her laptop. She didn't need to look up files. She had built that company with him. She knew where every skeleton was buried. She remembered the late-night meetings, the hushed phone calls, the competitor's design file that had miraculously appeared on their server just before a major contract bid. At the time, she had chosen willful ignorance. Now she chose war. She spent the next 2 hours composing an email not to a therapist, but to a team of forensic accountants and her most aggressive corporate lawyer. A week after landing on her last full day in London, Sarah sat on a park bench, adding the final touches to a sketch of the Albert Memorial. Her phone vibrated. A news alert. The headline was an earthquake. Miller Avionics CEO, Robert Miller, under investigation for corporate espionage. Whistleblower Tip Cites, systematic theft from rival Jones Aeronautical. She gasped, her charcoal pencil falling from her hand. The article was devastating, outlining a complex, multi-year conspiracy. It quoted anonymous sources who spoke of a data leak, so precise and comprehensive, it could have only come from someone at the very heart of the company's founding. It was Catherine. It had to be. This wasn't just revenge. It was a scorched earth campaign. As Sarah's mind struggled to process the seismic news, a second notification chimed. An email. Her blood ran cold when she saw the sender's name, Catherine Miller. The subject line read, "An atonement and an audacious proposal." With a trembling finger, she opened it. It was long, meticulously composed, and stripped of all artifice. Dear Sarah, I am writing to you from a place of profound and necessary humiliation. There are no words sufficient to apologize for my reprehensible behavior on our flight. What I subjected you to was a projection of my own deep-seated bitterness and prejudice, and I will carry the shame of that action for the rest of my days. I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness, as I know it is not mine to request. Instead, I am writing to inform you of the path I am choosing in the wake of my self-destruction. As you have likely seen in the news, I have taken steps to sever my life from that of my ex-husband and the company we built on what I now recognize was a morally bankrupt foundation. I am liquidating all of my assets tied to Miller Avionics. This is not just a divorce. It is a demolition of my former life. But one cannot simply live in the rubble. I feel a desperate, urgent need to build something new, something that stands in direct opposition to the ignorance I displayed. I am establishing a foundation with the entirety of my fortune. Its sole mission will be to empower the very people my privilege and prejudice sought to diminish. It will provide scholarships, grants, and invaluable industry mentorships for young women of color pursuing careers in aeronautical engineering technology and the creative arts. I would like to call it the Jones-Miller Initiative. I know the audacity of including my name, but my hope is that it will stand as a permanent reminder that something positive can be built from a place of profound failure. The Jones is to honor your father, a man whose genius my world sought to steal from, and to honor you, the daughter who showed me what grace under fire truly means. His permission would, of course, be sought. This brings me to my proposal. An initiative of this magnitude needs more than capital. It needs a soul. It needs a visual identity that communicates its purpose with power, elegance, and authenticity. Sarah, I have spent the last few days studying your online portfolio. Your talent is immense. You don't just design logos, you build stories. You are the only person on this planet who should do this. I want to hire you to be the founding creative director to build the brand from the ground up. I will pay any rate you ask. I know this is a shocking request. You have every right to refuse to delete this message and relegate me to a painful memory. But I am asking you to consider it. Consider the possibility of taking the ugliest moment of our lives and using its energy to forge a legacy of opportunity for countless others. Whatever your decision, I wish you nothing but the best. Sincerely, Catherine. Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis. She called her father immediately, her voice shaking as she read the email aloud. He listened in his usual thoughtful silence, letting her pour out all her confusion and shock. Dad, what do I do? How could I possibly work with her? Sweetheart. He began, his voice a deep, calming resonance across the ocean. The world isn't neat. It's messy. People who are broken do monstrous things. It doesn't excuse the act, but it can sometimes explain it. This woman, she's at a crossroads. She could have taken her money and disappeared. Instead, she's choosing to face her ugliness head-on. She's trying to build something. He paused. It's not about forgiving her, Sarah. Not now, maybe not ever. It's about purpose. Can you use this ugly, messy, shocking situation to serve a purpose that is bigger than your own justifiable pain? His wisdom cut through her turmoil. This wasn't about Catherine Miller's redemption. It was about the futures of countless young women who would follow in her father's footsteps. It was about creating the opportunities he had to fight tooth and nail for. She hung up the phone, a newfound resolve settling within her. She walked back to her hotel, sat at the small desk, and opened her laptop. Her fingers, steady now, flew across the keyboard. Dear Catherine, she typed. Thank you for your email and for your remarkable candor. The mission you have outlined for the Jones-Miller Initiative is not just vital. It is a cause I am deeply passionate about. I am prepared to accept your offer to lead its creative development. Before we proceed, I suggest a video conference to discuss the foundational principles and a creative brief. There is much work to be done." She paused, then added one final sentence. "Let's build something beautiful." She hit send, the single click echoing in the quiet room. Outside, the lights of London were beginning to glitter against the twilight sky. Her trip, which had begun as an escape from a life in which she felt small, was ending with the acceptance of a role that was larger than she had ever dared to imagine. The turbulence had passed. The flight was over. But her real journey, she knew with a breathtaking certainty, was just about to begin. And there you have it. A story that starts with ugly prejudice and ends with an incredible life-altering revelation. Sarah's journey reminds us that you can never judge a person by their appearance, and that true strength isn't about wealth or status. It's about grace under pressure. Catherine's spectacular downfall is a powerful example of how hatred and bitterness will ultimately only destroy the person who carries it. Karma found her at 30,000 feet, and her world will never be the same. What did you think of the pilot's epic announcement? Let me know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and unexpected twists, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable drama. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for listening.